Greetings, this is Griff Ruby with my review of the last book published in Asimov's Foundation series, by Asimov himself anyway. The awe-inspiring and rather overwhelming For the Foundation. This was the original hardcover as it first came out, and needless to say, when it came out, I eagerly read it. It was everything one could have expected. I have to say, it's really something else to see here, even more than the previous one, Prelude to Foundation, a real glimpse of Hari Seldon, the man, and who he was. In 1941, when he penned the first installment for astounding science fiction, Hari Seldon was just this bigger-than-life, illustrious man conducting his final meeting of all the psychohistorians of his group, and so forth, before he folded up his notes for the last time, or minutes or whatever, and said, "I am finished," which was actually in there. And then, in 1951, having come up with a whole series in astounding science fiction, he then was writing the initial section in Psychohistorians, which gave us a little more of a glimpse of the man and some of his struggles that he had to deal with, and being called Raven Seldon, and because he predicts destruction and all this kind of stuff. And so he already had to deal with popularity problems, but he was still very, very important and in many ways larger than life, and just seemed to know all kinds of things that, how would somebody know these things? So that was pretty impressive. But again, we're seeing him from the outside. And all the rest of the stories in between that made the rest of the original trilogy, and also again continuing in Foundation Edge and Foundation and Earth, Hari Seldon is really just a name. A person who leaves these recordings, some of which are show up, about what's supposed to be happening, but other than that, the man is no longer exists. But then, of course, Prelude to Foundation gave us our first glimpse of Seldon as a young man who had just come up with some of the initial equations that would begin to lead to his whole psychohistoric thing. Forward the Foundation, of course, continues this development by studying in 10-year increments, starting 8 years after he first arrived on Trantor when he was 32, and gave his talk on a paper he'd written on psychohistory at a mathematicians conference that had caught everybody's attention, especially Demerzel and the Emperor and so forth. They got their attention caught by it, and then he has all his adventures in that volume. Well, 8 years later, we start with him being 40 years old, and as he's turning 40, things are coming along. But more things happen, and Demerzel is in trouble. And because the accusation is floating around from this kind of jingoist kind of character who wants to stir up trouble, basically, and start spreading the rumor that Demerzel is a robot. Well, okay, he is a robot. I hope that doesn't count as too much of a spoiler, but he is. So how can he convince everybody that he's not? It doesn't help to go, well, I'm not a robot. When in fact it would be perfectly trivial to show that he is. So what do? Well, he solves that problem in a very clever and brilliant way, and that's probably one of the more rewarding parts in all of this. Certainly one of the genuinely amusing parts, and joyful, because he really has this, it's a magnificent triumph. After all, it reflects not only on Demerzel as the first minister, but also on the emperor, who could either be blamed for having a robot instead of a human being in such a role, or being too dense to notice, which either way doesn't reflect well on the emperor. So, Leon the First, by the way. So, having the emperor, his reputation restored, Demerzel nevertheless needs to make his departure. And thus begins a motif that begins to accumulate more and more as we go through this. Because the next installment it's 10 years later. Hari Seldon is now 50. And his adopted son, Rach, is now 30. Always about 20 years younger than Hari Seldon. Hugo Amaral would be 11, so he'd be 39. He's just 11 years younger than Hari Seldon. And they're working away at it. But again, the same jingoist will not, he himself, he has died, but some of the members of his movement are vowing revenge. And they want to destroy Hari Seldon, who, by the way, once Demerzel left, it turns out Hari Seldon was now serving as First Minister of the Empire. Very powerful role when you think about it. Definitely high ranking. So, and still Cleon's the Emperor. Well, in this time, however, there's a plot to kill, or at least remove or do something to remove Seldon as First Minister, so that one of the conspiring members of what had been that other group from before, gets the revenge on Hari Seldon and his adopted son Rach, who had contributed to the demise of that jingoist. Jojo Joranum. What a name, huh? But anyway, the revenge fails just barely. Unfortunately, it's through a woman whom Rach happens to have met and become attracted to whilst involving himself in trying to help scout this group out. They figure out who he is, and their perfect plot is to have his own adopted son kill him by filling his brain with mind-altering drugs so that he doesn't know what he's doing. He'll just raise a blaster and shoot who he's told to shoot, even though it would be his own father. Unfortunately, the girlfriend he's picked up along the way turns out to be with Imperial security, and she too is with him and is able to rescue the day, and that's really great. It's really neat how that happens. So it's scary, it's a close call, but they get out of it alive, and that's the great part. And nowadays, what's left of that movement is absolutely routed out, and that's the end of it, because they tried to kill the Emperor. Only the Emperor does get killed, well, actually the First Minister, but this would have been leading to some kind of ousting or coup or overthrow or killing of the Emperor if their plan had followed through as intended. So instead, the Emperor gets randomly killed by some other completely random event. You can kind of see it coming, actually, but it's not the sort of thing. But the thing is, Hari Seldon did not see it coming. And that kind of reveals to him that there's a lot about knowing all this psychohistory that doesn't tell you anything about individuals. It doesn't. So, now, Cleon the Emperor has been a good friend to Hari Seldon. And now suddenly the Emperor is gone. Hari Seldon basically survives by resigning from being the First Minister. So he goes out gracefully, bowing out, putting in good words for the incoming military junta that's going to take over and run the empire for a while until they can get another emperor, which turns out to be quite more than 10 years further down the line. But at any rate, he survives. The girlfriend of his adopted son survives, and they actually, in fact, manage to continue to be supported by the Empire for a time. But we have our next sample. It's now 10 years later, and Hari Seldon is 60. And a lot has begun to happen. There's Dors Venabili. I don't know how to pronounce it. Venabili. I don't know how you want to say it, but anyway, Dors. That seems easy enough to pronounce. It's just his consort throughout his life. She was literally assigned to him by Demerzel back in Prelude to Foundation. She was his protector, the Tiger Woman, and she gets a bee in her bonnet about some kind of plot to take down Hari Seldon. She's very, very, very protective. And she gets wind of it all because the little 6 or 7-year-old granddaughter, Wanda Seldon, seems to have had a dream. That's kind of a neat touch, the dream, you know. How many times have people said something that really had something real behind it, but because they expressed it in some way that was childish or superstitious or whatever, just got dismissed by, oh, this is just a bunch of childish twaddle or superstitious rot, you know. But it turned out that it was like some kind of a code, if you will, for a very real and genuine and legitimate concern. But it didn't get the attention because it wasn't presented in a way that people could say, oh, I see what you're saying. We need to do something about this. Just, oh, the mumble frats is going to take over the bumbleblatch. And this is a problem, huh? Okay, fine. What do I care about mumbleblatch and bumbleflash? You know, right? But, you know, when suddenly you discover what these things really are, in case you have the patience to listen and really and try to discern what's really being talked about, you just don't know. And it turns out there was a plot, but it wasn't to kill Hari Seldon. In fact, actually, what's interesting is somebody in the military junta, not the main guy, but you know, his kind of next in office kind of person, had been plotting with this new, extremely brilliant mathematician who actually contributed substantially with some very interesting and worthwhile equations. But this guy's loyalty wasn't right. And so that just goes to show brains aren't everything. Loyalty is also a concern. You know, you can talk. You know, what's the point of having somebody who might be a very, very bright person if their loyalty isn't in place? So you need that too. So at any rate, the Dors basically is the one who is really being plotted against, and it is Dors' destruction that is brought about. And it really, it's very emotional. It's kind of shades of Bicentennial Man all over again, whereas after 200 years the robot has become, you know, like human. And he kind of says the same thing to Dors Venabili, you know, what have I done for you? And she says with her last words, your love made me human. And that's it. Because you see, she was a robot. Now, before we go any further, there's a little bit more about these first 3 sections I have reviewed worth bringing into the picture. And that is that they were already originally published in the Isaac Asimov science fiction magazine. The first part about the departure of Demerzel and the whole bit where you had to rout those who claimed he was a robot, that all happens in here. This is published back in 1991, November 1991, and there's some very interesting differences in this. Most notably, by far, is that Dors Venabili, her state as a robot, is openly discussed. I'll give you a little quote here on page 21. And, let's see. No, 32. It's 21 of the book, 32 of this. Okay, so Seldon understood that he found in Dors everything he would have wanted in a wife. True, he had no children, but he had neither expected any nor, to tell the truth, had greatly wanted any. He had Rach, who was as much a son of his emotionally as if he had inherited the entire Seldonian genome, perhaps more so. It was therefore not proper for Seldon to hint at the fact that he had almost from the start, certainly from the day of the Nephi Bilibot, accepted Dors as a robot, one who was, like Demerzel himself, in all ways indistinguishable from a human being, unless one were to consider that she had all the virtues of humanity in greater than the usual amount. He had watched her calmly eating dinner. How could anyone eat like that and not be human? He knew of her other biological functions, and they showed no signs of anything but humanity. She had never in all her life together admitted outright that she was a robot, nor had she ever denied it outright. It had gotten to the point where he no longer thought of it. He had started off in the beginning by telling her, as honestly as he knew how, that it didn't matter. and it didn't. He had never tried to decide whether she was one or not. Had looked for no evidence, had tried to find no proofs, had done his best to dismiss the matter from his mind. But now she had said what she had said. She had remarked on her own superior knowledge of robots, and was that not an actual admission after 8 years of silence? So this whole bit, it's openly and frankly discussed and mentioned at times that she's a robot. In going to the book, though, all those passages, here's what's page 21, the equivalent part. Seldon understood he found in Dors everything he would have wanted in a wife. True, he had no children, but he had neither expected any nor to tell the truth, and greatly wanted any. He had Rach, who was as the son of his, emotionally as if he had inherited the entire Seldonian genome, perhaps more so. The mere fact that Dors was causing him to think about the matter was breaking the agreement that had kept him in peace and comfort all these years, and he felt a faint but growing resentment at that. But he pushed those thoughts, the questions, away again. He learned to accept her role as his protector and would continue to do so. After all, it was he with whom she shared a home, a table, and a bed, not Eno Demerzel. That's all. A whole bit about robot. And in fact, until she actually freezes up, or is about to freeze up towards the end of the section when he is 60 years old, the fact that she is a robot is barely even hinted at, and only most vaguely and remotely suggested by her extraordinary abilities and so forth. But at no point, I don't know if that's supposed to surprise people or not, but I guess if one hadn't been following all of this from before or knowing how Asimov writes. The next installment, the one about Cleon the Emperor, appeared in the April 1992 issue of Asimov Science Fiction. I couldn't find any difference except one word that was probably a typographical error. The word when appears. That should have been what. In the book it got changed to what. I didn't notice any other differences. So it seems to be following the book pretty close. Too close for me to discern a difference. And finally, the third installment, the one about Dors Venabili and when she gets zapped basically out of existence, is in the April 1993 edition of Asimov Science Fiction. And this was the last of these segments actually published in a magazine. I only noted a couple small differences here. In the magazine, Cleon's sons are not going to succeed him, so they're going to go live on some outer planet somewhere. They, plural, sons. For some unknown reason, in the book it becomes Cleon's son, singular. He isn't going to succeed him. He's going to go live out in the same planet, wherever in the outer world somewhere, and just stay out of the whole thing and survive the fall of the dynasty that Cleon the First had been part of. The other small difference was when there's a brief description of the Prime Radiant. For some reason, in the magazine, it was described as a cylinder, a little black cylinder sitting on the desk. I don't know. In the book, that's corrected to being a little squat black cube sitting on the desk, and which is kind of a neat reference to that's how it's described back in the original trilogy. But it also kind of connotates, at least in my mind, although in a way the original trilogy maybe thought it was anticipating this, the black cube of the original NEXT computer upon which the very first HTML was being developed. I don't know how relevant that is, but it's kind of funny. That, too, is a faceless black cube, just like the Prime Radiant. So, that's what had been published before. And, of course, there then comes the final part, Wanda Seldon, which is contained only in the book. So, we get to Wanda Seldon here, part 4. That did not appear in magazine form. If you want that, you have to get the book. Now, in that one, Hari Seldon is 70. Things are falling apart. The military junta has been replaced with an emperor finally. But the emperor is a good guy, but he has no power. It's not like the emperors of before who could decree something, there it shall be. He can say whatever we want, but it's got to go through a whole lot of legislators and this and that. And hey, this is democracy. You want to change a light bulb, you got to get 7,500, equivalents to congressmen to approve the funding and who's going to do it and write out a contract for it and da-da-da-da for somebody to actually go up and change the light bulb. And that's kind of how it's become. So things just don't get done. Litter doesn't get picked up. People litter all the more because what's the point? You do the floor, the trash can. Things don't get repaired. Things are kind of falling apart. It's really, you can smell the decay. And the streets are becoming a rough and dangerous place. And on several occasions, Hari Seldon meets up with street ruffians who just treat him with disrespect. But Wanda Seldon, of course, turns out to be the great new opportunity. Hugo Amaral, however, has died. And in this section, Rach and his wife Manella, and they have another child younger than Wanda, Balis or something. They've gone off to Santani, and then that had a big revolution. And he's gone, and they're unaccounted for. I'm sure they're not heard from again. That's basically they're gone. So now it's just down to Hari Seldon and Wanda, and well, there's still a few encyclopedists left, and that's all. But then Wanda's got this ability, and then they hook up with another guy named Stetton Pulver, yes, an ancestor of Preen Pulver, no less. And then it turns out he and Wanda both share this ability that makes the second foundation possible. And then they even meet up with Bor Aloran, which we finally get to meet. Back in the original installment, he's just a name. Salvor Hardin had known and received some psychological training from some guy named Bor Aloran, of whom Seldon says in his holographic image, I left no psychologist on your foundation except for Bor Aloran, and he was one of us. When we finally get to meet Bor Aloran as a young guy that Wanda and Stetton are working with. So that's kind of a neat little glimpse there. And then you could tell he really had intended to write one more section. That would have been Seldon at 80 and so forth. Finally getting the whole trip to getting all the encyclopedias sent to Terminus all made to happen and so forth. But in a way, we kind of have a lot of that, at least from the side of Gal Dornick back in the original Foundation trilogy. So it would have been kind of like a review. As it is, however, as we know, there's the next trilogy. I'm not going to review that now. Maybe some point of the other Foundation trilogy that comes after all of this, where the Asimov estate contracted for 3 more Foundation novels to be written by prominent science fiction authors. And the second of those kind of deals with some events from that time, and in a way kind of fills the spot as much as anything ever would for that last 5th section that would have been there. And then it ends with an epilogue, and basically he's reviewing his life and grateful for the things that have been and missing the things that have been, but just he has this prime radiant in his hand. It's like he just died with this thing clutched in his stiff little dead fingers. Kind of a graphic ending. It would have gone better after a 5th section, but oh well. And it's really kind of the end of Hari Seldon's life. I think if there'd been that section, it would have been called Hari Seldon, because in every section it's named for somebody who leaves or dies or whatever. Because Wanda, they go to something that's just an equation somewhere in the math they call Star's End. It's kind of a place of isolation, but nothing further is said. He's kind of trying to not give away where that is in this book, if you're going to read them in the sequence of how they all get, of the narrative instead of the sequence they were written. It's carefully not giving that away. So, all in all, at this point, though, we are really getting a sense of Hari Seldon, the man, who he is, and what it is to be Hari Seldon. And that is just, Yeah, it's gut wrenching. All these departures and things, just it's not a cheerful story, but at the same time, it's so powerful. It's the ultimate foundation book in a very real way, and that's what I have to say for this.